had not undertaken the proper training. Parliament hears it took the AFP almost 2 years to brief Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton on the alleged rape of a Liberal staffer. And wage growth at record lows in the public sector amid pay freezes and delays to awards. A doctor who administered a higher than prescribed dose of the Pfizer jab to 2 elderly Australians did not complete the required vaccination training. Healthcare Australia, which was responsible for the vaccination of the aged care residents in Queensland, said all health professionals had completed the online training provided through the Australian College of Nursing. However, Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt told Parliament that Healthcare Australia has now revised its advice to say that the doctor had not completed the required training. He has asked the Health Department to take action against the company and the doctor now. The 88-year-old man and 94-year-old woman who were given the additional doses are now being monitored in hospital. The doctor who administered the doses has been stood down from the vaccine program. Here's what Greg Hunt, the Health Minister, told the House today.
The advice I've just received from Deputy Chief Medical Officer Michael Kidd provides a correction to that which was previously provided to me. Earlier today, the Vaccine Operations Centre provided the following public statement in writing. Healthcare Australia has confirmed the doctor had undertaken the training, and then just before question time, the report from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer confirmed in writing Healthcare Australia has advised that this doctor and all health professionals involved in the immunisation rollout have completed the online training provided through the Australian College of Nursing, and the company has advised that it has copies of the successful certificate of completion of the course for each health professional. The revised advice is that on further investigation, Healthcare Australia has now advised that the doctor had not completed the required training. This is being investigated by Healthcare Australia, and we are expecting a report later today. Healthcare Australia has advised that all other Healthcare Australia immunisers
Members on my left
have completed the training. Healthcare Australia has also advised that this doctor has not been involved in the vaccine rollout in any other facilities. Given this, 1, I apologise to the House for the inadvertence. 2, I have again reaffirmed my apologies to the family. And 3, I have asked the department to take action against the company and the doctor for what is a clear breach on both fronts. I table both pieces of written advice to which I refer, which confirm the advice of Healthcare Australia as previously stated.
And that's the Health Minister. Now, we are expecting to hear from the Shadow Health Minister, Mark Butler, shortly. I want to bring in political reporter Jane Norman now. Jane, it's been revealed the Home Affairs Minister on another issue, Peter Dutton, was told about the alleged rape of a former Liberal staffer. This is now days before she went public with her story. Now, Jane, he's now the 3rd minister that we know of who had knowledge of Ms Higgins' case and apparently didn't tell the Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's right, PK. So we already knew that Brittany Higgins' former bosses, Linda Reynolds and Michaelia Cash, knew about this alleged rape that took place inside Parliament House in March 2019 before Ms Higgins went public with her story last Monday. Well, in question time today, Peter Dutton, the Home Affairs Minister, has confirmed that he also knew about this alleged incident in the days before it was made public. He's confirmed that he was informed by AFP Commissioner Reece Kershaw on February 11, so that is 4 days before Brittany's story became public. So there's obviously a question for Mr Dutton to answer about why he, like Senator Reynolds, like Senator Cash, chose to stay silent about such a serious allegation and, we're told, kept the Prime Minister in the dark. There's also some questions for the AFP themselves because under their legislation, they're required to advise the Minister of any politically sensitive investigations at the earliest possible opportunity. Now, we know that back in March 2019, after the alleged incident took place, Ms Higgins did go to the police, but she chose not to pursue the matter because she feared that her career could be jeopardised. So the AFP knew about this back in early 2019, but it's only 2 years later, ahead of the publication of Ms Higgins' story, that the AFP Commissioner has chosen to tell Mr Dutton. So this is really going to add fuel to Labor's attacks about, firstly, the government's handling of this complaint, but secondly, trying to get to the bottom of who knew what and when. It's now sort of more than a week after the story broke, and it's now been revealed that a third cabinet minister did know about it. For the Prime Minister's part, he insists that he first learned of these really serious allegations when the story broke last Monday. But there are some questions about what his office knew. And to that end, Scott Morrison told Parliament today that he's asked the head of his department to examine the records of his staffers. Now, we knew that was actually happening, but today his language seemed to shift a bit. He said that he wants his departmental secretary to assure him of the credibility of what his staff have told him. So I think, PK, it's pretty clear that there is a long way for this story to go.
Oh, absolutely. And as you say, so many questions still unanswered. Look, Jane, in a pretty dramatic turn of events, Ms Higgins' former boss, the Defence Minister Linda Reynolds, was actually admitted to hospital today. She was meant to address the press club. What do we know about this? Yeah, well,
up until last night, we were getting a draft copy of the Senator's speech that she was due to deliver to the press club today. So it was very clear that up until last night, she was intending to front the press club, give her speech and face fresh questions from journalists. Now, some of her colleagues were surprised that she had actually kept the appointment and hadn't pulled out earlier, because she has been under immense scrutiny over her initial handling of Brittany Higgins' complaint. We know that the alleged incident took place in March 2019. A few days later, Senator Reynolds started learning about the seriousness of it. It was initially thought that there was a security issue in her office. It then became clear that it was much more serious than that. And by April 4 of 2019, we know that Linda Reynolds was in contact with the AFP. So she knew about the allegations that had been levelled by Ms Higgins. So all last week, she was really, in the spotlight, under scrutiny about what she knew, why more support wasn't offered to Ms Higgins, why she didn't tell the Prime Minister, why she didn't sort of, engage the AFP at an earlier time. We actually saw her, we saw the pressure on her on Thursday in question time. She became visibly upset. She was getting teary. She actually couldn't even answer the questions that were being asked of her. And in a pretty unusual move, she asked that, she could take a few days before answering some of the questions. So she's clearly under pressure. It has got her to this point where she's now in hospital. We understand it's a pre-existing condition. It's clearly a heart condition because her cardiologist has been involved, but she'll be off Parliament for the rest of the week. And I suppose we're just awaiting an update as to her condition.
And we obviously wish her the best. Jane, thank you. That's political reporter Jane Norman there. In other news this afternoon, a stronger than expected increase in private sector pay over the past 3 months of 2020 has kept wage growth above economists' expectations. My next guest this afternoon is EY Oceania Joe Masters' head. Welcome to the program. What do you make of the figures that have been released?
So look, the overall wage number was stronger than we expected, as you said, rising 0.6 in the quarter. But I don't think we should get too excited for two main reasons. In annual terms, wages are only growing at 1.4%. So that was steady from the September quarter at record historic lows. So still very weak wage growth. And the data also revealed the ongoing unevenness of the recovery from the COVID crisis. We've seen some parts of the economy get wages growth sort of bouncing back to pre-COVID levels. Admin and support services, for example, professional technical services. But there's others that are still really struggling. Two to call out, public sector wages grew just 0.3% in the quarter, and accommodation and food services still experiencing virtually no wage growth in annual terms.
Yeah, and this wage growth issue really predates, as we know, the coronavirus pandemic, economic problems. It's really, almost baked in to some of these numbers. Give me your sense of just how entrenched this is now.
look, is very entrenched. So we have a structural issue. As you said, wage growth was very weak prior to COVID. We've actually seen since the global financial crisis a greater share of the total income in the economy go to corporate profits and less to the workforce or to labour. Now we've got an additional problem because the COVID recession has left us with higher unemployment and higher underemployment. So we have a lot of spare capacity in the labour market, which basically weighs on wage growth and does mean that we are likely to face years of weak wage growth.
Just on JobSeeker, which was increased permanently yesterday, but many critics saying it was not increased enough. What's your take on the impact of some of that financial withdrawal, given unemployed people will effectively be receiving less welfare, on the economy?
Sure. So it's a pretty significant policy announcement. As you said, I think there had been hope for a larger increase to the permanent rate of JobSeeker. It does seem that the government has focused on making sure there's no ongoing structural deterioration in the fiscal accounts. In terms of the economy, what it means that at the end of March, we've got the end of JobKeeper, the end of rent and mortgage deferrals, and now baked in sort of a lower JobSeeker rate than we've seen over the last 9 months or so. And on Treasury's own numbers, estimated 1.1 Australians that will be surviving on that low JobSeeker rate. So look, household income has risen in the last 3 quarters because of the enormous amount of government support. We're now going to see household income take a hit. And remember, it's household spending that has been firing and underpinning this recovery process. So I think there is a bit of a risk that we face a bumpy period and a slowdown in the momentum of recovery.
And of course, then there's JobKeeper, which runs out next month. Look, I'm in here in Melbourne, that's where I broadcast from, and I know in Victoria, where there was the longer shutdown, there's still a lot of concern among workers and business that this is going to actually hit hard. What's your assessment of the withdrawal of JobKeeper next month?
So we have seen fewer and fewer businesses relying on JobKeeper. Now, unfortunately, the state of Victoria is obviously suffering a bit more than the rest of the country because of that very long lockdown that you saw. So we do have, whether we're looking at JobKeeper or mortgage deferrals, more stress in Victoria than we do in other parts of the country. I do think overall the economic recovery is underway. We can see that in a range of data. So there is a moment where you need to shift from that broad-based, generous support. But you do need to think about those parts of the economy, whether that's geographic or sectors, that are still in need of support. And that's the piece that we haven't heard yet. And that's the piece we probably won't hear until the May budget.
Yeah, and we are waiting. Jo, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
That's EY's Jo Masters. Returning to our top story this afternoon, it's emerged that a doctor who administered an overdose of the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine to 2 elderly residents did not have the proper training. An 88-year-old man and a 94-year-old woman at a Brisbane nursing home were given additional doses and are now being monitored in hospital. Shadow Health Minister Mark Butler has responded to this latest development. Here's some of what he had to say.
A few days into the vaccine rollout in aged care facilities by a range of private providers contracted by the Commonwealth Government, and already we've seen a very serious maladministration, an overdosing, a very substantial overdosing to 2 elderly residents of an aged care facility in Queensland, which has resulted in both of them being hospitalised for observation. Australians are entitled to expect that every single worker contracted by the government to provide vaccines, particularly to elderly Australians, has completed the relevant training. We remember last year at the height of the Victorian wave that particularly hit aged care facilities hard, with 685 aged care residents across Australia dying, that the Prime Minister assured us that every single aged care worker had undertaken infection control and training in the use of personal protective equipment, or PPE, only to discover later that only 1 in 5 aged care workers had completed that training. We cannot afford to see that sort of lapse again in this vaccine rollout. Public confidence in this vaccine rollout is crucial, and to maintain that confidence, the government simply has to do better than this. Happy to take questions.
It sounds like the Healthcare Australia didn't really tell the truth necessarily when it came to the doctor's qualifications. Should we trust them vaccinating that early?
Well, that's a matter for Greg Hunt and Scott Morrison. They've contracted a number of different providers. Healthcare Australia was involved in the InReach service in the middle of last year and the crisis in Victoria particularly. Greg Hunt has to assure Australians, if he's using these private providers, that every single worker is properly qualified and has completed the relevant training.
Do you think, given that there was a massive scale up of this rollout so quickly, that perhaps it was inevitable that there were going to be issues like this with such a large-scale government program at short notice?
Well, I don't accept it's been scaled up quickly. We've known this was coming for months and months. We knew that Pfizer had been approved many weeks ago now. We've seen the approval on the January the 25th. Now, in the US, the UK, Canada and Europe, the vaccine was actually being put into people's arms in less than a week after their medicines authorities gave the vaccine approval. There is no reason why these arrangements should not have been well in place before the actual rollout through to aged care facilities, and these sorts of arrangements being utterly assured. We've known this was coming for months.
And that's the Shadow Health Minister on the Labor side of politics, Mark Butler, speaking a little earlier. Well, Victoria has recorded no new cases of COVID-19 for the 5th consecutive day. Premier Daniel Andrews says if this continues, restrictions are on track to ease this Friday at midnight. The number of active cases in the state has dropped to 20, with more than 20,000 tests in the last 24 hours. There have been more than 1,200 vaccinated in the state, and Minister Jacinta Allen says Victorians should continue to trust the rollout.
We are taking a very steady, careful and cautious approach to the rollout of the vaccine because it's a big job to do. We're determined to get on and get this vaccine rollout completed successfully. The vaccine continues. The advice is the vaccine continues to be a very safe procedure to take part in, and it's going to be such an important procedure as it helps us get through this coronavirus pandemic, as none of us want to go back to 2020, and the vaccine is a big step towards getting further away from those experiences in 2020.
Greens leader Adam Bandt joins me this afternoon. Adam Bandt, welcome.
Hi, Patricia.
I know that the Finance Minister, Simon Birmingham, has written to the crossbench with an update on when the staffer who's alleged to have raped Brittany Higgins lost his Parliament House pass. What can you tell us?
Well, we've been concerned for some time, not only obviously about the alleged rape that's taken place and the very serious nature of that, but what the government has done after it and the way the government handled the incident at the time, but also then the steps that they took afterwards. And we've been concerned that it's looking increasingly as the various versions of events between the government and Ms Higgins in many instances don't add up. It's looking increasingly like a cover-up, the government trying to cover up its own actions. And what has concerned us is that the alleged rapist may in fact have been allowed back into Parliament House in the time since the alleged rape, which obviously would be extremely concerning for many of the staff who work in Parliament House, and that he's been operating as a lobbyist. Now, we asked the Prime Minister about that in the House and in the Senate a couple of days ago, and the Prime Minister has come back with some of the information, and we've got another piece of the information today. And what that shows is that the individual in question has actually been a lobbyist and has been on the Attorney General's lobbyist register, which raises some very serious questions about how it is that someone who has been sacked from a position in the government for what the government says was a security breach, and we suspect something more, is then allowed to start operating as a lobbyist with the privileges that that gives. We now need to know whether or not, as a lobbyist, this alleged rapist has been coming back and having meetings with ministers, ministerial staff, departmental officials, because that would not only be incredibly inappropriate, it puts staff in this place in the situation where they may be having to meet with someone that the government knows has serious questions about them, is now an alleged rapist, is coming back into the building and potentially having meetings. So we're we now need the further information to come out. But what we've learnt today about this individual being on the lobbyist register, the Attorney General maintains, raises some very serious questions.
OK, so what we know now that despite the fact that he was sacked from his job, he remained on the lobbyist list. Do you accept that because Parliament House sign-in logs are manual, there's no way of knowing whether the staffer was signed in again?
Well, two things. One is it appears, and if there was an independent investigation, this would be clarified. But one thing it appears, it's not that he remained on the lobbyist list; it's that after leaving, he was then put on the Attorney General's lobbyist list. So at some point, the government said it is okay for this person to now go on the lobbyist lists. The second point is with respect to the meetings. Now, I don't accept that the government is unable to find out who has come into Parliament House and at what time. I mean, that is something that goes to the basic security of Parliament House. It's the reason that we keep records. It should be able to be searched so that we know whether or not this person who would have been on the lobbyist register came in for meetings.
Are you surprised by revelations that Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton knew of the alleged rape because he'd been informed by the AFP before the story broke in the media?
Well, again, this is another reason that there needs to be an independent investigation so that we get to the bottom of who knew what when, and that the results of that are made fully public, which is not something the Prime Minister is willing to do. It appears to be the case that there are protocols in Parliament where there is a serious crime reported to have been committed or alleged to have been committed that has a connection with politics, so might involve people who work in Parliament or members of Parliament, then the protocol says, as we understand it, the Home Affairs Minister has to be reported. Now, you would think that that meant that the Home Affairs Minister was given that, notified about that a couple of years ago. The Home Affairs Minister has said that that only happened recently, which raises a question about why that only happened recently. But he also said he was told before the Prime Minister. And again, this raises the question about, is it credible that with all of these people, including now a very senior minister in the government, knowing about this over a period of 2 years, can it really credibly be said that the Prime Minister did not know about it until the media made inquiries? Now, an independent inquiry into that, where the results are made public, would clarify those questions. At the moment, all we have is the Prime Minister has handpicked someone to conduct an inquiry, and he will not commit to releasing the results of that.
So
and that
just
is
to
why
be clear, you don't accept that this inquiry will get to the bottom of this issue?
Well, it's about whether or not the public can have confidence that we'll get to the bottom of who knew what when. Now, this inquiry that is taking place, we do not know who is going to be asked questions. We don't know what they're going to be asked questions about. And the Prime Minister hasn't put the terms of reference of that inquiry to the Parliament. And the Prime Minister is refusing to commit to releasing the results of that to Parliament and to everyone else. In fact, all he said is that he'll give a report to Parliament, which will presumably be the Prime Minister's own version of what he wants to say to the Parliament. Now, that is not acceptable. That is completely not acceptable, especially because, and this is a crucial point, it's not acceptable because at the moment, the Prime Minister's versions of events and Ms Higgins' versions of events diverge in very key respects. Ms Higgins says, for example, as I understand what she's saying, that staff from the Prime Minister's office were contacting her over the last 2 years when the Four Corners episode came out, were contacting her, and she interpreted it in a certain way. Now, the Prime Minister has said that something very different. Now, an independent inquiry could get to the bottom of that, and I think just that simple conflict that we've got there, plus the fact that now more and more questions are coming out about how the government acted after they found out about this, justifies an independent inquiry.
Look, just moving on to the other breaking news this afternoon in relation to the vaccination or the 2 elderly people who were given too much of the Pfizer vaccine. We now know that this doctor didn't get the formal training that the doctor was meant to get. That's been confirmed by Greg Hunt in the Parliament. What do you make of that revelation? Are you still confident in the vaccination program the government's rolling out?
Well, I guess I'd want to know why and how this situation could happen, because it is concerning. I am a supporter of the people getting vaccines. I got mine earlier this week as a show of my support. I was asked by health authorities to do that, and I said I would happily do it because I think it's important, and I think the vaccination program and the rollout needs to occur in a way that happens in a way that people have confidence in. And I am very concerned about anything that could undermine confidence in the rollout, and that's my main concern. So so of course this is concerning, of course it is, but we've only just heard about it very recently. The Health Minister was forced to correct his answer at the end of question time, so that's the first that we heard about it. And I really want to know why and how this happened, because we can't let anything get in the way of undermining public confidence in the public health response.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it, Adam Bant? I mean, we know about the anti-vaccination movement. We know about misinformation, disinformation. We know about the fact that people, fabricate things about vaccinations. That's the danger, isn't it? That you don't want any kind of disruption at the beginning of such a significant and important rollout.
That's right, and that's why I think we need to understand how and why this happened. I mean, the doctors, nurses, public health staff who are working to implement this program are, I'm sure, all working incredibly hard, and they've had to bear the brunt of the pandemic and the COVID pandemic, and it's been a very, very difficult time for people who work in public health. And I'm sure that they are all doing their best to ensure that the program rolls out in a way that everyone has confidence with. So I think we need to know, as I say, it's happened not that long ago. We really need to know a lot more about how and why this happened to ensure that it's not going to give comfort to the kind of people or not comfort, but it's not going to give something for the people that you're talking about to then use to undermine the health response. And that's what really concerns me.
Look, Adam Bant, just finally, I'm mildly obsessed with getting the vaccine myself, but I'm not, in store to get it for some time. Is everyone in your life jealous that you've been getting it so early?
I don't know that jealous is the right word, but I have spent the last couple of years taking our kids to go and get their needles, and so I feel that if it's something that I've been asking my daughters to do over the last couple of years, then it's probably only fair that I line up and do it myself.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait to get the vaccination. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Patricia.
Greens leader Adam Bant joining us there. Well, sticking with this afternoon's breaking news, it's emerged that a doctor who administered an overdose of the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine to 2 elderly residents did not have the proper training. For more on this, I'm joined by Associate Professor Margie Danchin from the University of Melbourne and Murdoch Children's Research Institute. Thank you for your time. What do you make of this latest development that this doctor who gave this incorrect dose did not actually complete the training? I think we've got some problems in our connection with you, because I did hear you just say you can't hear me speaking. So we will return, of course, in a moment. But that breaking news this afternoon that this doctor had not actually fulfilled the required training to be administering this Pfizer vaccine and essentially gave these 2 elderly patients too much of the vaccine. Now, these 2 elderly patients are now in hospital, just being monitored at this stage. They've shown no adverse consequences to date. But of course, the government has had to correct the record on this, going into Parliament, as Greg Hunt did, to say that this was the case after previously saying that, that all the required training had happened. Joining me again this afternoon, Margie, what do you make of this latest development that this doctor I don't think we have that guest, so I'll get back to that in a moment. But yeah, this obviously has been quite disruptive for the government, which has been obviously with some of those high-profile people getting jabs, the Prime Minister, the opposition leader, Adam Bant, who we just spoke to. It's been pretty important for the government to send the message to the public that the vaccine is safe and is important to get as they roll out a pretty big program. So this is a bit of a headache for them to manage, but of course they have ordered an investigation and stood the doctor down too from the program. Time now for business with Alicia Barry while we wait to get our other guest back up. And Alicia, Woolworths profit numbers and the market performance was down.
Yeah, so Woolworths is one of 20 of the top 200 companies to report their half-year earnings today. Among the others was Scentre Group, which owns shopping centres in Australia, the Westfield shopping centres in Australia, in fact, and also Sydney Airports. And as you can imagine, both of those companies performed quite negatively given the travel restrictions and the lockdowns that prevented people from attending the shops physically. But when it comes to Woolworths, the COVID impacts had the opposite effect because people were stocking up on pantry items, liquor and various other things through not only the physical stores but the digital channels as well. Woolworths reported a 28% increase in its half-year net profit to $1.13 billion. Now, Brad Banducci says the trend has continued into the beginning of this year. In fact, sales have been quite strong. He does expect them to taper off heading into June, though, because the pantry hoarding looks like it's going to subside as the restrictions ease further. But what he is closely monitoring is the digital behaviour of customers. He says for every 100 visits into the physical Woolworths stores, he's seeing around 65 visits on the digital apps. And he expects that digital visits will eventually outpace the physical visits by customers to the Woolworths stores and digital channels. And that could provide some opportunities for the company, but also some challenges because they have a large physical presence. Shareholders are also always looking for the dividend payout, and that was increased this half year to 53 cents a share. Woolworths shares were up nearly 1% by the close, but when it comes to the broader market, it was a fairly negative session, and that had a lot to do with the fact that investors are looking to Wall Street, where traders there are quite nervous about long-term interest rates rising, indicating that inflation might rear its head sooner than people had expected as the economic recovery picks up pace. And that could be bad for assets which are very highly valued, like tech stocks. So we saw tech stocks sold off in our markets, and commodity prices had a bit of a fall as well, and that weighed down the miners. So by the close, the ASX and the All Ords were down 0.9% each. When it comes to the Australian dollar, it had a fairly reasonable session, staying above 79 US cents, and that had a lot to do with the fact that we got wages growth figures out, which were better than expected, up 0.6% for the December quarter, taking the growth rate of wages to 1.4% for the year. But worth noting that 1.4% is the second quarter running that wages growth are at an historic low. So the pay packets, while they've picked up a little bit for Australians, really have been stagnating for quite some time.
Thanks, Alicia. Alicia Barry there. Well, time now for my political panel. On the panel this afternoon, Liberal MP Dave Sharma joins me and Labor MP Peter Murphy. Welcome to both of you. And starting with you, if we can, Dave Sharma, a doctor who administered a higher than prescribed dose of the Pfizer jab to these two elderly Australians, we found out now, did not complete the required vaccination training. Dave Sharma, this is pretty alarming, isn't it?
Look, I think it is concerning, Patricia. I think that this was a doctor. He didn't complete the online training, as I understand, but of course he should. The two residents who received a higher dose than they should have been given extra care, and I understand they're not suffering from any adverse effects. But look, really, I know the Minister is quite upset about this, Greg Hunt, and he's asking and seeking explanations from the administering authorities about how this could have happened. But clearly, it's not acceptable.
No, Peter, that's right. And the aged care vaccine rollout is being undertaken, we know, Peter, by the federal government. Are you confident in the federal government's ability to roll this out?
Well, I would like to be. And Patricia, you would remember what we lived through, obviously, last year in Victoria, where we were told that aged care workers had the proper PPE training and then found out it was about 1 in 5. And this is, I mean, it's very unfortunate for the people that got the injection. It's unfortunate timing, of course, isn't it? Because a number of us have got the vaccine in the last few days in order to go out there, put the public health message out there and try to increase confidence. And I very much hope that this doesn't undermine public confidence in the vaccine and the vaccine rollout, because it is so important.
Yeah, that's the risk, isn't it, Dave Sharma? Of course, we're going to try and get, and the Minister said this, to the bottom of what's gone on here and making sure that the system is working. But you're at a point in the cycle where you want people to trust the vaccine, to trust the rollout, to not create any uncertainty.
Look, absolutely. It is very important, and I think this is why we need to address this openly and honestly, as the Minister has done, and we need to get onto it quickly. But we also need to be clear about what hasn't happened here. I mean, this was, nonetheless, it was a doctor who was administering the vaccine. No, he hadn't done the correct online training, but there's no evidence of any adverse effects on those that received the high doses, and nor, more importantly, is there any evidence of adverse effects from the vaccine more broadly. And I think that's obviously been the focal point for scare campaigns, if you like, and misinformation on this up until now, and none of that has been borne out by these events. And
of course, lucky for those people too. Peter Murphy, I know you mentioned you received the vaccine yesterday. How are you feeling? I told Adam Bant that I was jealous he'd got the jab. I think it's an exciting thing to be vaccinated always.
Yes, I'm feeling fine. My arm is a little bit sore. It feels like a dead arm, or, you know, when you get a tetanus injection or someone gives you a bit of a punch. And that's really all. It didn't hurt when it happened. And again, I volunteered to get the vaccine because I felt like it was my public duty as someone who is a bit immunocompromised and has an underlying health condition, to show people that I'm not asking them to do anything I wouldn't do myself, and to try to give people confidence. If people like me are prepared to do it and get the right medical advice about it being safe, then I hope that everyone else does the same thing.
Let's move on to another big story that's broken this afternoon. It's been revealed the Home Affairs Minister, Peter Dutton, was told about the alleged rape of a former Liberal staffer days before she went public with her story. Dave Sharma, why didn't the AFP tell him, as they should have 2 years earlier? This timing is it raises more questions than answers, doesn't it?
Look, I think those are questions for the AFP. I mean, as I understand, and I heard the explanation in question time, as Peter would have as well, that the Home Affairs Minister was advised by the AFP Commissioner, Reece Kershaw, at a meeting, I think, on the 9th of February, so just a couple of weeks ago now.
Yeah, and 4 days before the story broke. So the timing is, well, it's bizarre, isn't it? It's suspicious. It raises a lot of questions.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily impart those meetings or suspicions to...
You give me your words then, because I think it's really weird. I do. I think it's really strange. So why did that happen?
I can't give an explanation, but I would just say that with all of these things, and particularly with this issue, I mean, look, the police rightly do not and should not go and tell politicians or their minister when any particular investigation is underway. They need to exercise discretion there, because law enforcement is properly, enjoys a degree of independence from the political arm of government, as it should. Now, obviously, I think the police commissioners would rightly, from time to time, alert their political masters when a particularly high-profile or case is likely to appear in the media or is afoot, but they need to exercise a high degree of discretion there. But look, I can't speak for the AFP, obviously, here, and I don't know, other than the sequence that was outlined to me today in Parliament. I don't know any more than that.
I know, because you're not Peter Dutton and you're not the AFP, but do you think that those answers need to be provided?
Well, I mean, I think it's reasonable to. And we're looking into this, into the timeline of some of these issues. But I think it could well be the explanation that, and I don't know this, but that Ms Higgins had made clear and been in touch with the AFP that she wanted to move forward on this, as she subsequently decided to do, and that was the trigger that got them to alert the Home Affairs Minister. I'm just speculating here. I'm only hypothesising, but that would be, I think, a perfectly reasonable and defensible explanation for what has gone on.
Peter Murphy?
I'm not sure the timeline fits that, though.
Yeah, Peter Murphy, what are your concerns around the timeline?
Oh, I'm really concerned about this, because I know that Dave is doing his best with imperfect knowledge, but my understanding is that there are protocols about the Federal Police briefing the responsible minister when there have been complaints or issues where it's appropriate. and that should have been done at the time. And if we just take a step back, from what we know, there was an incident in the Defence Minister's office overnight, which was a security incident, and people knew at the time, if not within a day, that there was also an alleged rape. The AFP were aware, security was aware, the Defence Minister was aware. How is it not a security matter that has to be mentioned to the Minister for Home Affairs, let alone the fact that there's an allegation of a horrendous sexual assault that also happened? So there really are questions about who did know when and why. And as was shown in question time today, we now have a scenario where at least 2 cabinet ministers, I think it's up to 4 people in the Prime Minister's office, let alone security, the AFP and other people, knew about the rape allegation, but yet apparently no one thought at any time between the incident happening and the media looking into the incident to tell the Prime Minister that there was a serious issue that he should be aware of. And I guess my question is, if he wasn't told, what sort of a government and what sort of a structure is he running where people keep these really serious matters from him? And if he was told, why is he saying he wasn't?
Okay, well,
there's a lot of questions.
He's saying he wasn't. So I want to put that to you, Dave Sharma. Why? What sort of government is being run here? Why wasn't he told? Isn't this something people should be concerned about, that at the highest level of person in your government, the Prime Minister of the day, that many people would know and that information would be withheld from him?
Well, look, I think he's made quite clear that he's unhappy and displeased with the fact that he wasn't told at the time. But I would say, I mean, I know the Labor Party and Peter are sort of pursuing this, the who knew what when line of questioning. I think it's an important issue, but I think the most important issue here and the primary issue that we should be addressing is, issues around workplace culture and acceptable behaviour and complaint mechanisms when these things happen. I mean, clearly there have been failings there, institutional failings that need to be addressed. Now, whether the Prime Minister should have been told sooner, yes, I accept he should have been, and he certainly accepts he should have been, but I think there are some quite deeper issues that we really need to be focused on addressing here, and they're the issues across the Parliament. They're not the preserve of government or any particular party.
No, but right now, all of the questions are about things that have happened in your government. So you can say, it happens everywhere on every side, but
all of the questions
about your government.
All of the questions Labor is asking, but I actually don't think that they're second-order issues, as I said. This is the who knew what when story. This isn't about how do we prevent these things from happening again. I think that's the main thing that needs to be addressed.
I'm going to contest that, and I'll tell you why. If you don't know who, what, when, then how do you change your systems to go, next time we don't do that, this is who should know, when they should know, and what they should know. They're actually linked, aren't they?
They're linked, but I think they're the protocols for how you deal with an event like this that might happen in the future. Clearly, they need to be improved. The support that's provided to victims, the complaints procedures, whether there's and some sort of offices that they can go to where they can seek counselling, all these sorts of things. Yes, they need to be addressed, but I think that post-mortem is underway, if you like. I mean, certainly the Prime Minister's asked the Secretary of his department, Phil Gaetjens, to conduct an inquiry into who knew what and when, and he's made clear that he thinks that needs to be done, that wasn't done as well as it should have been, and it would need to be done better in future. But there's also a whole lot of other issues that we're looking at as part of that.
OK, Peter, is that acceptable?
I don't think it is. I agree with Dave that there are serious systemic issues that have to be addressed. And cultural issues, and it's something that I've been talking about for a long time. And part of it is the independent processes that we don't have, and an independent unit, which is like an HR unit that we don't have. But the other real issue that has been highlighted by this horrible incident is the role of ministers and ministerial staff and taking responsibility and walking away from that old-fashioned notion of Westminster responsibility. If there has been a growing pattern of staff, either named or unnamed, being held responsible or blamed for things that go wrong, and ministers therefore saying, it wasn't me. And we're the ones that get elected, parliamentarians. We're responsible for what happens in our name and in our offices, and that is even heightened responsibility for ministers. So the culture is set from the top. And the horrific allegations that Brittany Higgins has to be brave enough to bring forward shouldn't have happened, and we shouldn't have needed them for this sort of discussion to be public. We had the Four Corners story, we've had other things that have happened, and yet apparently none of that was serious enough to have not just a conversation about the specific incident, but a conversation about what that reveals about the culture and the systems in Parliament and in the government.
Look, Dave Sharma, before we go on a very specific issue I know you're pursuing, you're seeking the early release of the 5 remaining Bali 9 prisoners nearly 16 years after they were first arrested for drug smuggling. Take me through why this is a bipartisan push that you're trying to lead.
Well, look, thanks for raising that, Patricia. I'm working with Graham Perrott, who's a Labor member of Parliament, and in credit to him, he's the one who's initiated this motion. But Australians would remember the Bali 9 as they were then when they were first arrested and tried in Indonesia. 2 of them have been executed. 1 unfortunately died in prison, and 1 has returned home. But there are 5 remaining, and for some of them in particular, I think it's at least 2 of them, they've got life sentences, which means life is life in Indonesia. It's for the term of your natural life. And all of the 5 have been model prisoners by all reports. They've rehabilitated themselves. They've certainly shown remorse for their crimes. We're seeking to appeal to the Indonesians' sense of compassion and humanity, to look at a remission of those sentences or a conversion of those sentences from life sentence to a fixed term sentence, because we think, look, these people have shown remorse for their crimes. They've done a significant amount of time in jail, and we think they deserve some mercy and compassion.
Thank you to both of you for discussing all of these issues with me.
Thanks, you.
PK.
And I just want to
Peter.
congratulate Dave and Graham for that motion. I think that's absolutely proper and essential. So congratulations for doing that.
I'm sure lots of Australians would want to see that happen. Liberal MP Dave Sharma and Labor MP Peter Murphy there. Well, in breaking news, all passengers on flights from New Zealand into Queensland will have to quarantine from 6 p.m. tonight. Queensland is removing New Zealand's safe travel country designation. Now, Queensland Chief Health Officer Jeanette Young says new cases of community transmission in New Zealand means a cautious approach is needed. Dr Young says New Zealand is working very hard to contain this community transmission, but they are still in a critical stage of their response, so we need to keep watching closely. So anyone who has arrived into Queensland from New Zealand since the 6th of February is recommended to come forward, get tested and isolate until they have a negative result if they haven't already been tested. And returning to our top story, the federal government has revealed the doctor who administered an overdose of the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine to 2 elderly residents did not have the proper training. An 88-year-old man and a 94-year-old woman at a Brisbane nursing home were given additional doses and are now being monitored in hospital. The company managing the vaccine rollout in Queensland, Healthcare Australia, said all of its staff had undertaken training for the COVID-19 immunisations. But clearly the minister then has had to go into Parliament and confirm that the doctor who administered the wrong dosage actually hadn't completed the online training. So the original assurance that the right thing had happened has not happened. Independent Senator Jackie Lambie joins me this afternoon, and we will begin on those revelations. Jackie Lambie, first, welcome.
Oh, good afternoon. How are you?
Very, very good, actually. Are you worried by revelations that the doctor who administered the incorrect doses of the Pfizer vaccine to 2 patients wasn't properly trained? Does it worry you about the vaccine rollout?
I think there's going to be mistakes and things are going to pop up as we're rolling this vaccine out. It's been done quite rushed, there's no doubt about that. But yes, I am concerned that a doctor hasn't trained himself up properly or hasn't been trained properly when he should know better. So, yeah, that is worrying. But I guess that now this has happened once, I would not expect it to happen twice. But, I just thank goodness that, or hopefully that the person this has happened to, that they don't have any reaction to it further on or over the next few hours.
Yeah.
That's what I would be hoping for. So, but I hope we've all learnt a lesson out of this. And like I said, that doctor should have known better.
Yeah. Yeah. Could this undermine the confidence in the vaccine rollout, or is that contingent, as you just mentioned, on what might happen in the next couple of hours?
Oh, look, I think that, you know, we know doctors aren't perfect. They're only human beings. I know that we're really trying to get this thing rolled out, and there are going to be issues with it along the way. I'm sure there'll be more to come. I think we're just going to have to ride with that. Like I said, I'm hoping that, you know, that the GPs out there and the doctors that are doing this have gone, oh, better make sure we do this properly. And that's you know, that's a warning, and hopefully no harm will come out of that, and we can just get on with continuing to roll that out with very limited side effects or you know, anything else that's going to happen along the way would be nice.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to another issue. What did Simon Birmingham tell you about the cross-party review into the culture at Parliament House?
Look, as for the cross-party review, I believe that what you're going to see is those 3 or 4 reviews that are going on now is that what I understand is one is into the Liberal Party culture, one is to what is going on in the Prime Minister's area, and then there's a couple sort of loose. I think you'll find that they will deteriorate that they will actually sort of go away over the next 3 or 5 days, and you'll have one group of people that will be looking at it all. That's what I see. That's how I understand that's going to happen. And the other thing is, the sooner they bring in the AFP, the better off they're going to be. So I think if the AFP can go in and let them do their job, they're the people that are trained to do this, let them get to the bottom of it, and then the other group of people that are set up on the outside to start making sure there is change going on with this culture.
Okay, what would you like the review to cover in terms of the culture in Parliament House?
Well, I think the review has to go into a lot of areas. You know, it's got to go into the Department of Finance. It's got to go into MOPS and how much assistance they're actually giving employees and members of Parliament in relation to how they're telling them to deal with these issues. I think Comcare's got a big piece to play in this. I don't believe they're collecting all the evidence from both sides. So I think you'll find that it goes a lot wider than just the culture of the accusations that are going on with people in these smaller areas. There's actually other departments that are involved in this, and I think they need to be looked at, and I think you'll see that's going to come out very quickly. I would like to see this happen, and this big review team, we'll call them that, set up over the next 5 to 7 days, and I would like to see the Australian Federal Police in there and start investigating the claims. If those witnesses have come forward and made statements, to get in there as soon as possible and start doing their job.
Have you been told who might lead the review?
No, I have not, but I have to give it to Minister Birmingham. Look, I spent more than 30 minutes with him this morning. I know that he's talking to all the crossbench. I know that certainly the females on the crossbench have given their contributions in there. I believe a couple of them have said the same names to put on those on that review team. So I guess we're going to see whether Minister Birmingham's been listening to us or not. But you know, I think he's in a bit of trouble himself this afternoon in the last 5 or 10 minutes. I think the sooner he gets this moving, the better off it's going to be for everybody involved, especially those that have been hurt, or those people, you know, that are doing those statements and saying that, you know, that they've been abused or been victims of what's happened here.
What's your experience of how men in Parliament House behave? Is there a culture of entitlement? Well, there's a culture of entitlement up here, full stop. But, you know, whether the abuse stuff, I have to be honest with you, Patricia. You're speaking to Jackie Lambie here, and you probably wouldn't try that crap on her, because she's probably turn around and knock your fair off your chops. So, you know, I personally don't see it. I'm not part of those parties either. I don't go to the after parties or anything sort of like that. We try not to mix too closely. You know, you keep your friends close and your enemies even closer, as they like to say. So for me to comment on that when I'm not sort of in that mix, you know, we've already got enough on a plate. We have to put in a lot of hours with minimal staff. Yeah. We just sort of kept out of that culture. Yeah, you're not in the Liberal Party. Yeah. I get that. You mentioned Simon Birmingham in the next 5 or 10 minutes. What are you referring to? What's likely to happen?
Well, I'm not sure. I believe there's some news just come out in the last, 10 minutes or so from the Adelaide Advertiser. There was something that happened in his office. So, of course, we'll be watching that very closely and seeing what happens. So I just think the sooner they remove any parliamentarians out of the situation, they bring in the Australian Federal Police and they bring in this group to review this, the better off we're all going to be. This is not something that we can take days and days with. We need action. It needs to start pretty much straight away.
OK, we'll seek to confirm or see what that story is for our viewers who are thinking, what has Jackie Lambie referred to? What do you make of the Defence Minister Linda Reynolds suddenly being hospitalised?
Well, I wish her well. I'm not sure what her condition is. I'm not her doctor, that's for sure. But whatever the issue is, I'm sure, like everybody else in Parliament House, that we're wishing her well and that she gets back on her feet as soon as possible.
What questions does Linda Reynolds have to answer about how she and her office handled this?
Well, you see, this is why we need the Australian Federal Police to come in, and they need to start questioning it. So if those witness statements have come in, they need to start moving and getting their job done, and leave it to the professionals to do, not for journalists to do, and not for those in the Senate or those in the dark side over there to do. This is what needs to be done. It needs to be done professionally by the Australian Federal Police.
I just want to talk about a couple of other issues before I let you go. Of course, we cover policy extensively on this program as well. Just on the industrial relations legislation, do the government's changes to the Better Off Overall test in its industrial relations bill make you more likely to support it? What do you make of the changes?
Well, I'm really glad they've given the boot the boot. That seemed to be a really sticking point. There is still an inquiry going on, so I haven't yet seen the recommendations come out of that. That'll be out, I think, at the end of next week. I'll be closely looking at those. I'll be looking at whether or not there'll be amendments coming from the coalition in relation to that bill. So it's just a little bit early to see where all this is going. I've commented on the bills in the past too early and they haven't done me any justice.
Okay, but they might need your vote. What other changes will you push the government to make to this legislation so they can get your vote?
Yeah, look, I am concerned about what does actually a casual mean, whether... the arbitration added on wrote about the greenfields going from doing those deals from 4 years to 8 years. So there's still some points. Look, we are talking to the coalition, obviously, while the inquiry is going on. But like I said, I'll have a good look at those recommendations. I will continue those discussions with the ministers involved.
So at this stage, are you convinced that they've made the case for the changes?
For the changes?
Yeah, for the bill.
Well, I don't think they've finished changing the bill. That's my whole point. So I just want to see what's going to come out of these recommendations that are coming out of the inquiry and whether anything does change.
So what's your position currently on what you'll do?
Well, I'll wait for all the evidence to be put on the table and I'll wait for the inquiry to finish and do the right thing because that's what I'm supposed to do. And then I'll continue along the way and talk to the ministers why all that's going on and then I'll see what comes out in the wash at the end.
What are you concerned about with casuals? What are you asking them to do?
Well, I think for me, I just want to mean what is the meaning of casual? What is a casual? What's the wording? What's the wording in it? And that's what we want. So that's just one of the points. I don't know if anything else is going to change. I don't know what's going to come out of any further recommendations. I certainly sat in the inquiry last Friday. I spent more than half the day watching that inquiry go through last week. So I guess we just see what happens over the next week. But it will certainly no doubt be voted on back when we come back in that first week in the end of third week in March.
And just finally on Facebook, if I can ask you, I know you've been concerned about the deal. What concerns you about the Facebook deal?
Yeah, so for me, I'm more worried about obviously the media, the whole media deal itself, not just the Facebook deal. So I'm concerned that small business out there, small business cannot afford to run its ads in the big newspaper and all over TVs, just like I can't because I don't take political donations. We rely heavily on Google and on Facebook for advertising. There is no doubt about that. And I think the other thing is I'm concerned that we've got the big players out there, whether it's Murdoch, whether it's Stokes, getting extra money, and whether that money is actually going to get down to the bottom lot there for the journalists. coming through, and whether we're going to get more journalists put on. So that's a bit of a concern. I'm worried that SBS and ABC, even though they say we're going to get more money out of this, well, that's great, because I have to ask them this: if you're going to get more money out of any deal that you do with them, you're going to get less from the government, because that's how it works in turn. So, you know, are you not worried about your job out there, Patricia?
Oh, I don't think about it. Yes, no, I do. Of course, everyone worries about their jobs. If they don't, they're not, you know, working hard enough, I think.
Yeah, I am concerned about how these deals are going down. You know, what we would have rather have seen is a tax, and making sure that some of that money was actually allocated to going down to journalists and cadetship, that sort of thing. That's what we would have liked to see. I'm terribly worried about that bottom line.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're out of time.
Thank you.
Independent Senator Jackie Lambie. Well, that's afternoon briefing for today. For more on our top stories, stay with us here on the ABC News channel. I'll be back with afternoon briefing at 4 o'clock tomorrow, hopefully keeping my job. See ya.